This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Only 1% of commercial airline pilots are women of color. That's according to the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics. Saba Shahid obtained her private pilot's license and is currently working her way to become a commercial pilot. Saba is also the author of the children's book, My Mama is a Pilot, and she wants children to feel represented and valued through her stories. Her path to becoming a pilot is a little different than most. This actually started as a pandemic hobby, if you can believe that. And before becoming a pilot and an author, Saba worked in neurology. And on top of all of that, she's this year's recipient of the Girl Scouts of Connecticut Legacy of Leadership Award. And she joins us for the hour to talk about her life as a pilot, an author, and her work as a lifetime Girl Scout. Saba, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me and for the lovely introduction.
And for our listeners, let us know if you have any questions or if you want to share any stories about flight. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So Saba, there were so many things going on when you decided that you wanted to become a pilot. Tell us, what was the moment that made you want to become one? Because this was actually a pandemic hobby.
Yeah, 100%. So aviation was kind of always in my family, a little bit of history. So my father was in aviation school back in the 70s, and unfortunately he had to drop out because his father passed away and to support his family. So I always heard about aviation, and growing up, I always had an affinity to the sky. You know, anytime we traveled as a family, or even, you know, in my older years, once I was married, my husband and I did a lot of traveling. Anytime I flew, I felt like I was almost home. And so the pandemic rolled around. At that point, I was a new mom as well. My son, my first flight was August of 2020. So my son was just 14 months then. And I was very consumed and, you know, being a mom, now had just returned back to work and was not really doing much for myself. We lived very close to the airport that I trained in. So I trained at Westfield Barnes Regional Airport in Westfield, Mass. And we would drive by it every day. And both my husband and I would say, hey, you know, like one of us needs to try this. And so he ended up getting me what's called a discovery flight. And what that is you get 30 minutes on the ground with an instructor and 30 minutes up in the air. Where you basically just, you know, slightly touch the controls, right? And I still remember this very vividly. It was in August. I think it was August 1st. It was an extremely hot day. I had no idea what to expect. I was wearing jeans and a dark black T-shirt, right? No understanding that the cockpit is not going to be air conditioned.
Right.
And, you know, so went up and came back like completely drenched. And, you know, but it was comical in the sense that, wow, this is, you know, not what I expected. And on the same hand was very exciting as well, because it kind of gave me a glimpse of what this could turn into. And so after that flight, I signed up for a couple more and kind of just continued the path.
Well, so besides it being a very sweaty experience for, I think, many reasons, probably a little nerves, I would assume, because I probably would be just breaking sweat before I even get on air, which is funny because we're on a different kind of air as we're speaking. What happened during that first flight besides the jeans incident? You know, what was it about that first experience? I mean, of course, you've already had this buildup. You've always had an affinity. But was there something about that first flight that really got you hooked?
Yeah, you know, so aviation being such a male-dominated industry, one of the big things I think, and, you know, a lot of the credit that I have to give to is my dear friend and also flight instructor who recently passed, Frederica Ballard. She was the owner of the flight school. And so another really empowering thing for me, you know, on that day was meeting her and knowing that she was a woman, a pilot, but also the owner of the flight school. So for me, I feel like that in itself just opened up, you know, many layers, made me more comfortable, made me excited, you know, to learn about her experience. And she very quickly became a role model for me, role model, instructor, transitioned to a very close friend very quickly. About the flight experience itself, you know, I think that first flight and every flight thereafter, the moment that you take off it's just such an exhilarating, empowering feeling. I feel like in our daily lives, we're always focused on what we have to do next, right? As a mom, I feel like I'm constantly planning 10 steps ahead. Being an entrepreneur, I'm always thinking about, what the next thing is. And so when it comes to flying, when it comes to flight training, it requires such a level of focus that in those moments in each flight, I feel like I'm 100% present. And I feel like, I've just gained such a different level of, what's the word, like excitement and just exhilaration of being kind of one with the sky. And there's no picture I could say, that will give justice to what you actually see outside of the cockpit.
Well, and it sounds like because with us, with our feet firmly on the ground, we're hearing this and experiencing this with such awe. But it sounds like you were too, being awestruck.
Yes, 100% was awestruck. Aviation can open up, has opened up so many different doors for me. They say like a mile of runway, can pretty much take you anywhere, right? A mile in a car will just bring you from point A to point B. And it opens so many doors, doors of learning, doors of travel, different doors of, becoming a children's book author. And so, yes, I feel like it's, given me a whole new perspective, a whole new meaning and, desire to not only continue in my training, but to bring early exposure to those that are in the younger generations.
And with the training too, was this a skill that you were able to pick up quickly? What was that like?
So flight training has lots of ups and downs, to be completely honest.
Literally?
Literally, yeah. So there's some things that, you feel like you're amazing at, and there's other things that take you forever, to perfect. And so my personal journey, I think one of the challenges that I faced was weather, first and foremost, right? Living in New England, it's not the best weather. So there'd be days where I'd be so excited, anticipating, going up, and then, we would look at the weather and it just wouldn't be suitable. But what that experience taught me is, safety is always first, right? It's better to be on the ground, grounded with our feet, versus being up in the sky and saying, oh man, I wish, I didn't take this flight. So I think, that aspect of it made me a more logical pilot, right? And, there's been varying different levels of learning. I think being a pilot requires constant learning. I've noticed in myself, if there's ever been, a couple of weeks where I haven't flown, I feel rusty, right? One of the things that I do is before a flight, whether it's the night before or the morning of, I like to chair fly just so I can kind of picture myself doing what I would do in the cockpit. And that makes me more, ready for the flight since I haven't flown in a couple of weeks. So, a constant avenue of learning is very important. One of the other things that I did was, after I got my license, so I primarily trained in a Skyhawk, a C-172, and then I transitioned into a complex little Beechcraft Sierra. And so that was another huge learning curve for me now because I had mastered flying a C-172, but now I'm in a completely different aircraft. So that was a whole nother, learning curve, which it was very easy for me to land a 172, and it became a big challenge for me to land, a plane, a different type of high performance plane. And so I think, with flight training, it's very important to be positive. It's very important to have, be receptive to feedback because, that's what's going to help you become a better and safe pilot.
Well, you mentioning chair flight, I feel like you just changed the definition of how I see armchair traveling. and of course, on top of being a pilot, you have a career in neurology as well. Are there any parallels between the two fields?
Yeah, a little bit. So, so my writing career actually came from Creative Neurology, which is an organization that focuses on providing creativity and movement to those living with neurological conditions. And so when back in 2014, there's a symptom of micrographia, small handwriting. There was no resources available for the Parkinson's community or for those living with micrographia, so people with MS, people with stroke victims. And so I decided to take it upon myself to create a book, a workbook that, they can delve into and start practicing on their handwriting. And so really where the parallel comes, to play is that that's where kind of my author journey started, is by writing those self-help books. It was actually really amazing. The National Institute of Health recognized the Let's Combat Micrographia series and gave a grant, and then I was able to conduct additional research to publish a, now 60-page manual. It went from 20 to 60 pages. And so I think I always had an affinity for writing. And after becoming a pilot, the journey was also very special for me because, now I have 2 boys. But at the time when I started my training, it was just my elder son, Ayan. And it was a very fun experience because while I was learning, I feel like my husband and son were also learning. If I can share a quick story.
Go for it. We love a group project here.
Okay. One of the things I always remember about my flight training is after every flight, I'd be taxiing over to the parking area, and the airport that I flew out of, they had like the sky deck where you could stand and look, and they had these huge silver guardrails. I would just see a little hand like waving at me, and that was my son. And my husband would always make videos, and we have these videos of him going, "Mama, mama, mama," and then he'd have to run down to the onto the tarmac. I have to go open the door, and we'd always need like an extra 5 minutes with the plane. I'd always have to tell Rika, I'll be in 5 minutes. He wants to see the plane. And she would always be so supportive of that. And she was like, yeah, go ahead, take your time. And Ayan would hop in, and he'd pretend like he was the pilot, and he'd ask, what's this? What's that? What's this? And, hearing all of his questions at such a young age was very inspiring to me in the sense that, kids see things so differently. Right. And sometimes when we stop and look at their perspective, I feel like there's a whole nother level of learning that we can do as adults. And that's truly what inspired me to start writing children's books.
Well, I really love the multi-street situation here. It's always like a two-way street, but there's so many people involved, walking along these streets, and to see your son being so curious in what you're doing. And then I'm sure it like you said, it's inspiring and probably motivates and gets you to be curious as well, it sounds like. And so, so many layers here, but we've mentioned earlier too that only a small percentage of all pilots are women. And you mentioned too that you had a woman instructor, and you're also a woman of color, and those all play a huge role in this experience, right? So can 100%. Can you describe what is it like being a woman in this industry? And then on top of that, you're also a mom, and seeing your son being so excited, watching you, how does that change the way you do things?
Yeah, 100%. So, I think after becoming a mom, and also, after seeing, 8% of women worldwide are pilots. And then, like you said, 1% are women of color. So seeing, kind of those two statistics, it really drove me to want to do more. And, I think for my boys, both Ayan and Ashaz, one of the reasons why I started writing books and sharing this story about, how I became a pilot, became really important because I wanted other girls and other girls of color, girls in general, but also girls of color, to see that, you could go into a non-traditional role, right? You can envision yourself as a pilot or as, a CEO, and anything that you really put your mind towards. And so really it became my goal to allow my boys and other children to feel represented. And I wanted them to be able to walk into a library, and see their book there, to feel empowered, to feel like, hey, my mom did this, I can do it too. Growing up, I was born and raised in a first-generation American, and born and raised in Chicago, and then we moved to Connecticut. My father purchased a business out here. And in my school district, I was probably the only brown person that was, in school at the time. And although, I had a very supportive, school and friend group and stuff, I never necessarily felt any type of discrimination. I do know that I was different. And so I think it's one of my big goals right now as a mom and as an author to ensure that children, of different backgrounds are celebrated and they feel welcomed. So I feel, My Mama as a Pilot book has definitely showcased and opened up that door for girls in aviation, children in aviation. But then also there's a whole nother series of multicultural and bilingual books that I have that are transliterated into English from the Urdu or Hindi language, which is also just another, kind of easy way, right? Easy reading. Some of the books are based off of like the Itsy Bitsy Spider or Row 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 Your Boat, just to allow there to be that feeling of, okay, like, I belong.
Yeah. I love it when I see multilanguage or multilingual books, just because you realize how vast storytelling can be. And ultimately, there's a universality, right, of the themes that we tend to.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so similar, as a mom and having mom friends of different backgrounds. Like we're all, our goals are all very similar. We want our kids to grow up to be good people, educated, healthy. And when we can come together and celebrate that together, I think, kids are just become more broadened and more enriched in different cultures and more respectful of others.
Well, and I imagine too, learning to fly in general is already a very exciting thing. What was it like learning to fly while pregnant?
So this is, this is very funny. Again, I think the reason why I was able to fly with so much support was, again, with Rika.
Right.
Learning to fly while pregnant was like a completely different, realm. So I was literally like, my belly was touching the yoke at one point, and we had to buy a seatbelt extender, believe it or not.
I mean, it meant that your kid really wanted to pilot a plane, I'm thinking.
Yes, and it's so funny. So Ashaz is almost 1 now. And anytime he hears an airplane, he looks up into the sky and points. And, it really makes me think, because he was in the cockpit so much with me, that noise brings him comfort. And it's very exciting. But I had to make so many different adjustments. And it was, a lot of people were like, what are you doing? Like, why are you flying? And I was so determined. I was like, no, I want to continue my training. Just because I'm pregnant doesn't mean that, I can't do it. I knew I had kind of more stricter limitations.
Sure.
Right. I knew, like, if it was super hot, I'm not going up because I can't handle that. I couldn't handle it in jeans, but let alone, like 30 pounds heavier.
Yeah.
So we made, all these adjustments. I remember, there was one flight where Rico was like giving me water to make sure that I was okay, that the baby was okay. We had blueberries on one flight too. So, it was definitely challenging. I had to also map out some alternate airports just in case if I needed a bathroom break. And so, there's a lot of like funny layers to it as well. This one time, we were joking about weight and balance is a big thing when you're flying, right? Everything has to be calculated out to like the last drop of fuel or oil that you're putting in. And so we were joking, we're like, hey, like, weight and balance looks a little off today. Like, maybe we should put you back on the scale to see. So, it brought like a whole nother exciting, realm to flying, a whole nother layer to mine and Rika's friendship as well. And, something that I'll always remember, and I can't wait for Ashas to get older so I could tell him, like, hey, like, you flew with me my entire pregnancy. And I wonder if that's going to make him love airplanes a little bit more.
So rather than those Einstein for baby CDs, you had airplane engines.
Exactly. That's what he hears. Yeah.
And so many elements here, I think, too. But, with your experience, which is really unique, but I think it also opens up doors, like you said earlier, to people who want to do the same thing and not to be limited by, if they're pregnant or if they're a mom. It doesn't mean that they can't do the thing that they want to do. What do you think could be done to get more women in aviation and sort of pass that, the curiosity and the desire of aviation down the next generation, besides having your kid listen to plane engines before they were born?
Great question. So I think early exposure is huge, right? I think that really opens doors, right? Even as a Girl Scout, I think one of the biggest values I obtained was, hey, never close a door that's even slightly open, right? Because you don't know where it's going to take you. So, I hope people that are listening, anytime I share my story, I hope to like inspire others. And, especially through this book as well, like there's so many adults that have read it and they said, wow, I didn't know that this is what it requires to bring a plane up in the sky. And so it's, I think that that drive needs to be passed down. The stories need to be shared. There's so many amazing organizations out there like Girl Scouts, like Women in Aviation, the 99s, all of these organizations promote women in aviation. And so early exposure, having kids see themselves, like we said, represented, or having the opportunity to go to a museum, like the New England Air Museum, and walk through and see all the different airplanes. Those are all things that excite kids and, can potentially open the door to a future of flight.
I mean, I do love seeing planes in museums myself as an adult, but I'm perfectly happy with riding the airwaves just for now, just for now. And with us for the hour is Saba Shahid. She's an author, pilot, and recipient of this year's Girl Scouts of Connecticut 2024 Legacy of Leadership Award. Coming up, we'll hear more about her adventures in the sky and how her time as a Girl Scout shaped who she has become today. You can join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live.
The world gets still. I'm learning to fly, but I ain't got wings. Coming down is the hardest thing. Well, the good old days may not return.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Many of us picked up hobbies during the early days of the pandemic. For some of us, it was baking sourdough bread, doing jigsaw puzzles, or going jogging. I was really trying my best to read the books that are already on my shelves. But Saba Shahid, she decided it was time to fly. She obtained her pilot's license during the pandemic in 2021, and since then, she's written multiple children's books about flying, including her book, My Mama is a Pilot. Saba is here with us for the hour, and not only is she an author, pilot, and mother, she's also the recipient of this year's Girl Scouts of Connecticut 2024 Legacy of Leadership Award. With us is Alicia Pagues-Spearman. She's the CEO of the Girl Scouts of Connecticut. Welcome to the show, Alicia.
Good morning. Thank you.
And Saba, we were talking of sort of like the beginning days of you becoming the pilot earlier, and now you've set off to write books about your experience and children's books specifically. I know you touched a little bit on that earlier, but what made you decide that that was the genre, the medium that you wanted to go with?
Yeah, so that was the genre that I wanted to go with, again, because of my son. I wanted to give him that representation, right? I wanted him to see himself represented and know that he matters. And, I think that age is so fragile where they're like sponges, right? They want to know everything. They want to learn everything. They're so curious. And, if anything, I think at that point, if he can learn about aviation, if other children can learn about aviation, I think it would, again, possibly pave the pathway of them, wanting to become a pilot or else learn more. For me, I wish I was exposed at a younger age. I know I was, with stories and stuff a little bit through my father, but, I didn't have access to go to an airport and see airplanes, or to even, for that matter of fact, really read a book that tells you a little bit more than, oh, look, this is, this type of plane, or this is that type of plane.
Right.
And so, the focus really came from my son, Ayan, and wanting to focus on that age group to give them that early exposure.
I mean, it's kind of cool to tell your friends that my mom flies a plane.
I don't know if he totally
Gets it yet?
understands. Yeah, how cool his mom is.
Yeah, he'll get there. We'll tell him. We'll tell him his mom is very cool. And what was the writing process like for children's books? Because I think it seems very simple, right? But we know it's not.
Yeah. So actually, this book took me 4 years to write, believe it or not. I started writing it pretty early on into my training, as I was experiencing his experience of, a flight through, through the different times him and I went up, or we went up as a family, or just, the stories that I shared with him. And so this book is written through his perspective, which I think is really cool. Just to talk about
the process.
The process. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I think writer's block honestly is a real thing.
It's funny because we were just told by a couple people on the show that they do not experience that, but I'm very glad to hear someone
No.
does because
Yeah.
it's real.
It's so real. And I think that's also why it took me 4 years, right? Because there were times where, I was like, wow, like this is really flowing. This makes sense. And there were other times where I was like, what am I doing?
Right.
Why am
What
I
are
doing
words?
this? Yeah. What are words? Yeah. So, writer's block is huge. So that process in itself took a while. I also, to my books, I like to put like a little bit of a rhyme to them, to make them fun and an easy, enjoyable tone for kids to read. So that was a whole nother layer as well. For the My Mama's a Pilot book, I actually illustrated a lot of the drawings myself. And so finding someone to help kind of make that vision come alive electronically was a big struggle as well. Required me to go through multiple different people to really find what I wanted. And then, ultimately, this is like a reflection of me, right? So I wanted to make sure that it was something that was presentable, that would like to be, read by others and celebrated and with, all the effort that it took to put out.
And so you're being honored by the Girl Scouts this year. So talking about the generations of curious minds and encouragement, what does it mean to you to be a Girl Scout and to inspire the next generation of women aviators?
Yeah, thank you. So Girl Scouting is so near and dear to my heart. So I started my Girl Scouts journey as a Brownie Scout and worked my way all the way up to a Senior Scout. Girl Scouting at a very early age exposed me to a lot of different life skills,
Mm.
such as what it means to be a leader, what it means to be an entrepreneur, something even as little as working on a badge, right? Doing that little project and then getting that tangible badge for my mom to sew onto my sash. That was such an empowering moment. So I think even these small little victories really added up to my future of, expecting a little bit more of myself, and truly being a Girl Scout and getting this award is like a full circle for me because it reminds me of that little girl as a Brownie, right, who worked very hard all the way up to, I also got my Gold Award, which is the highest award in Girl Scouting that a girl can get, and which was also a spin-off of my first business, Creative Neurology, which is really exciting. So I think there's been, just so many amazing experiences. Also at a young age, I think one of the things that was very important to me was the exposure that I got to women in these, these roles,
Right.
in these leadership roles. So I was the youngest girl member on the board of Girl Scouts of Connecticut as a girl, and then transitioned a couple years later to the third vice president of Girl Scouts of Connecticut. And sitting in that room and hearing all these, important topics of discussion, and then having them come back and say, hey, Saba, what do you think about this? Right? As like a 14, 15-year-old girl. Wow, like that was super empowering. That showed me that my voice matters. And, that's truly one of the principles that I hope to not only pass down to my kids, but to girls and just children in general that are reading these books is your voice matters. You matter. You're important. Right. And those were all values, I think, that were instilled very early through Girl Scouting.
And Alicia, I want to bring you in here. You've been listening to the conversation throughout the hour. Anything that jumped out to you that you would like to respond to with what Saba has had to share so far?
Well, first, I think we did an excellent job picking her as one of our honorees. She's
Congratulations.
absolutely
Thank you.
amazing, amazing women. And it shows just what the Girl Scout means from early on. We build girls of confidence, courage, and character. And we really expose them to different opportunities to try something, to develop their leadership potential through lots of different age-appropriate activities. And she talked about being a board member. I just had an orientation. We have new board members, and part of our creed and culture is to have 4 Girl Scout board members. And so I just had the orientation with them last night, and I told them particularly versus the adult members, like the girl members, I will reach out to you personally because you're the voice of the Girl Scouts. I have to see what's going on and get your opinion. And so it is really an honor to have them serve on the board. I don't know many other boards that have young women serve on their board of directors, but we do have Girl Scout members who serve.
And Alicia, I wanna ask too. With Girl Scouts having such a strong history, throughout the country too, and not just here in Connecticut. But what do you think it means to be a Girl Scout in 2024?
In 2024, I think it means that we're just going to keep expounding on our Scout experience. Our focus is four pillars: STEAM, entrepreneurship, life skills, and outdoors. And I really think that now we prepare girls for the modern day workforce through game coding, robot building, rocket launching, all kinds of stuff. And this September, shortly, Girl Scouts will be attending Camp Sikorsky. So we have about 100 Girl Scouts that will be immersed in a weekend of activities thanks to our partnership with Sikorsky. And so I think there's a lot of stuff when you talk about businesses. Saba wrote a book. She's getting her pilot license. We want girls to thrive and we champion whatever their ambition is. So we welcome diversity. People have diverse needs and wants and dreams. Whatever that is, the Girl Scouts helps build leaders and people who are confident to try new things.
Well, we're all about trying new things here, and we want to thank Alicia Puggy Spearman, who's the CEO of the Girl Scouts of Connecticut. Thank you so much, Alicia, for sharing that with us and for joining us today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Author and pilot Saba Shahid will stay with us. And up next, Connecticut is known as the Aerospace Alley. The New England Air Museum is working to introduce more students and young adults to careers in aviation, and we'll hear from them after the break. You can also join the conversation. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live.
Learning the hard way, learning the hard way to be true. Now I'm learning the hard way. Birds of a feather, we rock together. And if we got a problem, we talk together. Oh, and spend time south, escape the bad weather. I said, oh, ooh, 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 oh. Birds of a feather, we rock together.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. This hour, we've been hearing from author and pilot Saba Shahid. Connecticut is actually known as the Aerospace Alley. Here in the state, the New England Air Museum is working to introduce more students and young adults to careers in aviation. And joining us now from the New England Air Museum in Windsor Locks is Stephanie Abrams. Stephanie, welcome back to Where We Live.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you've also been listening to this conversation. Anything you would like to respond to with what we heard so far from Saba?
Absolutely. First of all, Saba is amazing. I've had the joy of knowing her for some time. But also, the New England Air Museum is very focused on, we're aware of the underrepresentation of women in aviation, and we're doing quite a few things to change that. One is, of course, we have an exhibit, New England Women in Aviation, and it starts with the earliest aviators. Ruth Law, who's one of my absolute heroes, she flew less than 10 years after the Wright brothers. And if you saw the contraption, just imagine this really open contraption. And she flew out of Chicago in the winter and she broke distance records for all pilots. But then it goes up through, the WASPs, who were the women Air Force service pilots in World War II. They were not allowed into battle, but they delivered the aircraft. They delivered the B-29 Super Fortress, which my dad was a crew chief for, but completely unrecognized. And it goes up through women finally becoming captains for commercial aircraft, and also in the military becoming officers, and then into women who are creating the future of aerospace, like Dr. Davin Newman, who's created the biosuit, which will likely be worn on Mars. It's form-fitting, so you can do an EVA, an extravehicular activity. So that's inspirational. Also, we have aviation adventures, Girl Scout workshops, which ties in. I also was a brownie and a Girl Scout, by the way, but it was in the Bronx. It was a little different. We have inspiring future aviators partnership programs with high school students, including girls, introducing them to careers in aerospace, because there's so much more than being a pilot.
Right.
There are people, there are designers, there are mechanics, A&P mechanics. There's so many incredible jobs in aviation that we expose girls to. And then every year we have an event called Women Take Flight, where our museum is enormous. So all three hangars are filled, Saba, you've been there, are filled with women who fly, whether it's in the Guard or pilots like Saba, but girls and their moms come and they get introduced. They meet these women and they really just experience, they hear about all these different careers. Also, as women get a bit older, we have distance learning partnerships for several universities for their engineering department, and they do distance learning with us. So we have so much. And also, I think, Saba, as you know, there's an enormous labor shortage in the aviation industry right now. And so aviation cannot afford to overlook women in aviation. There is a critical need, and it's only getting, the gap is going to get wider and wider. And so we cannot ignore getting young women into these careers.
When I wanted to ask you about those challenges, because I feel like we're seeing those challenges in many, many different industries, but certainly with something like aviation, not to say more so, but certainly a different kind of consequence, I think, to some extent. And of course, we want to encourage anyone who's curious to consider going into this industry. But can you talk about, both of you maybe, what are some of the barriers that are very specific to women that they have to break into to become a pilot or even just to work in the industry? Stephanie.
One is getting them early. I've seen several studies that indicate that girls make career choices by 8 years old. And also the EAA experimental Air Force. EAA, help me out there, Saba. But EAA also did a study that showed by age 10, most female pilots made that choice by age 10. So you have to capture them early. You have to expose them. Kids don't know what they don't know, and that's why if they come into the museum and they're exposed to their careers, and their parents are exposed to these careers, that it doesn't have to be the traditional, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a physician, that there are so many careers. But I think the biggest barrier to entry is young people not being aware of these careers. Saba, do you agree?
Right. Yeah, 100% agree with that. Early exposure is so important. I also think creating that welcoming environment, right, especially for young girls, women as well. I think I mentioned when I was talking, one of the things that brought me comfort was seeing another lady pilot, right, at the flight school, and so having more of that, I think will really open the door for women, sharing these types of stories, having access to places like the New England Air Museum where women are truly celebrated. You're able to see yourself.
Well, and on that too, it's so interesting with the stat, because I'm thinking back on my own childhood. I was around 9, 10 years old when I realized what I wanted to do, or the idea of what I wanted to do. And Saba, with what you're saying, seeing yourself, I certainly never really saw myself represented in the media, and not really realizing the importance, actually, because that obviously did not stop me from wanting to do what I want to do. But can you also just expound more on the importance of seeing yourself really in anything?
Right. I mean, it's so important, honestly. When you see yourself, you can envision a future, right? And when you don't see yourself, it's a lot harder. So, just a personal story about going into libraries for me as a child, it wasn't a very happy experience. I didn't see myself in books, right? I didn't see my family represented in books. My family is a mixed family, right? And my husband is Caucasian. I'm of the Pakistani descent. We're Muslim, but there's no, I think we're doing a better job now at getting more diverse families out there and sharing stories of that. But even seeing, myself, I think one thing through Girl Scout, right, there were other women there that helped kind of encourage me, right? And so that was very important too. But I didn't necessarily see myself at that time that, hey, I could become a pilot, right? For me, it was the very traditional, okay, I'm going to go to school. I wanted to be a doctor when I was younger. Actually got admission to medical school, but decided not to go that route because I had my business stuff going at that point. But, having these conversations early about, hey, this isn't the only route that you have to go. And when we think about aviation, I think Stephanie kind of mentioned this a little bit. There's so many different fields, right, within aviation, air traffic control, being a pilot, being a mechanic on an aircraft, so many, even just the regs, right? There's so many different regulations, and the regulations are always changing when it comes to to flying. And so early exposure, long-winded answer.
You
It's definitely
need role models. And actually, one
yes.
fun thing we have in our New England Women in Aviation exhibit is Dr. Davin Newman with the biosuit that I was talking about. It's an augmented reality experience. So kids actually, to activate the experience, they have to take their picture. And so then they activate her and she bounces around talking about the biosuit, but they see themselves in the biosuit. And at the end, she says, "Welcome to space." But throughout our exhibits, and it's for girls and for boys, but it's showing them all of these heroes of aviation. I mean, aviation changed the way we live.
Right.
And these are men and women who literally changed the way and continue to change the way we live.
Right.
And to show them these role models and show them that one person actually can change the world.
When I remember covering a very similar story when I was in my early career in California, and I was in a Cub plane. So it's a very tiny plane flying around San Ynez Valley in the central coast of California. That was a mind-blowing experience. But I'll never forget, it was a very similar program where they brought in young students to pretend to fly. They can touch the things and whatnot. But of course, they had a pilot go off the plane with them. And then this little girl said to me that moment, she realized she wanted to go to flight school, and she did.
That's
she actually
amazing.
ended up going to flight school. So I think it was really important for me as a young person to witness that happening, that these stories can come true. And so I think, Saba, the question would be for you. You're here, literally a pilot, and you've created these stories to share with children. What goes through your mind when you're hearing people's reactions to, what you do or your books?
Yeah, so I think the kids' reactions are the best, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Because like you said, you can see that spark of curiosity kind of going off in their head, and they have all these questions coming about. There's also this one page in the book that shows women pilot, but of all different races and backgrounds, which I think is important, again, for that representation part of it. But it's really empowering to hear, like, a little girl coming up to me, similar, situation. I want to be a pilot. I've heard, stories of children sleeping with the book or taking it on their first flight, because it gives them that sense of comfort. It gives them that, joy of, wow, I can relate to this story, and now I'm getting into a plane myself. So, it's very empowering. It makes me want to write more, and share different experiences to make them comfortable. Even if it's like an ounce of exposure,
Right.
I think, if a child is given even that, they can, really run with it and bring it to different places.
Well, and Stephanie, I wanted to ask too, we could all use more joy, right, in our lives. And I think there's nothing happier or more joyful than hearing a child get really excited about something, because I think it's very infectious. So what goes through your mind when you're seeing kids at the museum and going absolutely nuts for whatever they're seeing?
Oh, when life gets too crazy for me in my office, I just go into the museum because they're always like, wow. I mean, they're so excited. But I wanted to add that hands-on element. We also have summer camp. We have Aerospace Academy in the summer, and it's the girls who are incredible because they get to the first day, they learn from one of our volunteers how to create a flight plan. Then they fly it in the Redbird simulator. But then they go into restoration with our restoration volunteers, and they actually rivet and solder, and they are exposed hands-on by touching things what to do.
Very cool.
And then they go to an airport. They get into the tower. They see what air traffic controllers do. So it's very hands-on. So it's a visceral experience. But the kids also, we have an F-18 simulator, which is I love. But anyway, when the kids are in that, they come out and they're like, wow, how did you make that so real? It's like, okay, let's talk about coding. That's another STEM career. Now, watching the kids, when you see that light go on and you see you just ignited a curiosity and a passion, I don't even have words.
Well, I don't think
There's,
that feeling gets old, right?
No, not at all. And there's actually a really fun story I can share with you. So Ayan and I went to the museum. I mean, we're there all the time, like probably once every 3 months we're there. He just loves walking through. But he actually just flew the new F-15 simulator. And when I say he was like on top of the moon, that's all he talked about the rest of the day. He went around saying, yeah, I flew a fighter jet, just like so nonchalantly.
Right.
And, He absolutely loves like the hands-on, where you have the volunteers sitting to make the airplane and doing all that type of stuff. So it's definitely a very near and dear place to us. Another funny story, if we have a quick second, when I was pregnant, and actually the way I met Stephanie was I had the opportunity to fly the Redbird simulator at the museum on days where it was, like this morning where it was like super overcast or very cloudy or rainy. And also for that comfort level, right?
Right.
Practicing flying while like 8.5 months pregnant was better to do on the ground versus in the air. So yeah, we love the New England Air Museum and go there often.
Well, we only got about a couple minutes left, but I do want to end by asking Saba, we're talking about igniting passion and curiosity with kids. How important is it for you for adults too? Because you started a little bit later in your life. And I think most of us sort of grew up with this idea of like, by the time I'm a certain age, I can't do the thing.
Yeah, no, that's so important. I think, a big takeaway is you're never too old. Right, you're never too old to learn. If anything, learning actually sparks different areas of your brain and causes you to, become more strong-minded. And so I think it's very important, if there's anyone that wants to explore it, to go and take that discovery flight. Right, you never know what's gonna come of it. You might love it, you might hate it, but hey, at least you tried it, right? And so, it's really exciting. To as a child or as an adult, to be able to take these experiences. I have a cousin who's also a pilot down in Georgia, and him and I are able to share these experiences together as well. And he also started way later as well in his life, but it just goes to show that age is just a number, right? If you really want to do something, if you put your mind towards it, you can achieve it.
And Stephanie, about 30 seconds. Any final thoughts you want to leave with our listeners today?
Definitely come visit the New England Air Museum. but I just couldn't agree with Saba more that we also have an adult aerospace academy, and it's mostly people who are retired, but they come and they're inspired. And we've heard that a few people go get flying lessons, and also from our camp, we've had young children that we hear they join young aviators, and so I think the experience of the museum and having the hands-on and the exposure really does drive people toward wanting to learn.
Well, thank you so much for that. You've been listening to Stephanie Abrams, who's the president and CEO of the New England Air Museum. Stephanie, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure for being back. Thank you for having me.
And Saba Shahid, who's an author, pilot, and recipient of the Connecticut Girl Scouts Leadership Award. Thank you so much for flying the plane with us today.
Thank you. Just remember, the sky is not your limit.
Sky is indeed not our limit, so get to flying for anyone who's interested. And just a quick reminder for our listeners that starting next week, Where We Live will move to Monday, Tuesday, Thursday schedule. We're excited to announce that Connecticut Public's weekly show, Disrupted, with the wonderful, wonderful Kalila Brown-Dean, will move from Wednesday at 2 p.m. to Friday at 9 a.m. So make sure to tune in then. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. Thank you so much for listening. And if you're going on flying, happy flying and stay safe.